Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Regan, unfortunately, the MBTA in Boston has had some troubles with safety over the past couple years, necessitating the federal government to get involved. We're not proud of this, but we want to fix it, and we want to make it better. Can you share some of the best practices that you've seen across the country that we might apply back home in Massachusetts?
Certainly, and and thank you for the question, but I know that enclosures and reimagining the workspace for workers is an important aspect of that, because at the end of the day, again, we are protecting people in their workspace, and that's an important aspect. So the physical space is important, but also I think these safety plans that are going to be developed that are required now, where workers have the opportunity to have their input, and they have to be adopted jointly with the union and with the agency. It can't just be recommendations can't just be imposed by the employer in this aspect, which is important. But I think for the most part, there is not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution to the safety problems. It's not going to be the same in Boston as it is in Las Vegas or as it is in Rochester, New York, where I'm from, because they're very different environments and different agencies. So I think the beauty of what the program that was put in place is it's going to take into account the local agencies, the reality of the local agencies, as well as what the workers, the eyes and ears on the ground in these systems are seeing day to day, and can help implement meaningful reforms that will protect both workers and passengers in those systems.
Thank you very much. Mr. Scribner, I appreciate some of your comments on high-speed rail and its viability in certain corridors, if I understand your background correctly. Because I have long made the case that there are a lot of reasons to love high-speed rail, but one of them is that if you're a fiscal conservative, it's a good investment. It has a good return on investment. In fact, there's not some vast high-speed rail conspiracy that infects every other developed country in the world and just hasn't made it to America yet. It's just that a lot of other countries weigh the options. They actually have transportation policy that allows them to choose high-speed rail over highways with similar amounts of funding, which is not the case, of course, in the United States. The subsidies vastly favor airports and highways. And when they do that analysis, it often comes back that the cost-benefit ratios favor high-speed rail. In fact, I happen to co-author at Harvard Business School a study on California high-speed rail that reached two basic conclusions. This was 10 years ago. One, it's going to cost more than they're saying. We know that's true. But the second is that it still costs less than making the comparable investments in airports and expanding highways that you would have to make to meet 2050 demand. And that's so often left out of this debate. I wanted to ask you, what are your views on how we should subsidize transportation? And how should we be subsidizing transit? Should we be subsidizing highways, et cetera?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's pretty expansive. My general view is that we should be trying to reduce subsidies across all modes and to stop distorting the choices of people who ultimately choose one mode over the other, the time they choose to travel, and so on and so forth. So, I'm
and by the way, this is where I completely agree. Like, if we just had a level playing field and we actually allowed the sort of free market in transportation to determine the best solutions, yes, there would be some corridors where we say it's too long for trains, you need to fly. Other corridors, it's just a better drive. But some corridors really make sense for transit or for high-speed rail, and we ought to do the economic analysis to determine that. We commissioned a study, my office did back in Massachusetts, to look at what are the subsidies for driving, because I don't think we think about that very much. We often think about the subsidies for transit agencies, and we hear these numbers about how much of each fare is covered by the taxpayer. We just asked, what are the subsidies for driving? It turned out that they determined in the state of Massachusetts, the state subsidizes driving to the tune of $64 billion every year. That's $14,000 per taxpayer, regardless of whether you own a car. And these subsidies come in the form of everything from just building and maintaining highways to providing state police, providing emergency services. 40,000 Americans died in car crashes. It's taxpayer dollars that clean all of those up. In contrast, by the way, not a single person has died in the entire history of high-speed rail in Japan. But as an aside, how do we think about reducing these subsidies, these gross over-subsidies for highways?
Well, when it comes to the interaction between subsidies for the road network and transit systems, for one, I think there is a synergy with congestion pricing. And not simply because of the revenue, but more for the incentive to not drive at those peak hours, and that may make transit more attractive. So I think there are ways to reduce the subsidies across modes and equalize across modes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I sure hope you can speak with the governor of New York. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.